Good morning. I want to read from this book by Bruce Tift called Already Free in chapter 6 because it's so good. And I just want everybody to hear this and even talk to me about it. So, the chapter is chapter 6. It's titled All Relative Experience is Relational. I've worked with relationships a lot, both personally and professionally. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I see about half individual clients and half couples. I think the reason I'm so drawn to and interested in this work is because my own experience of relationship has been so difficult, rich, and provocative. I don't think there's any likelihood that relationship will ever resolve into a nice, settled experience. For me, it's incredibly alive and therefore disturbing, apparently for both me and my clients. My wife and I met in the Masters of Buddhist and Western Psychology program at Naropa University in 1977. We got married 2 years later. We've been together quite a while. I think it's accurate to say that I've experienced being disturbed in this relationship every day of the nearly 4 decades we've been together. She assures me that it's been the same for her. There she is, just being herself, and I'll have a sudden surge of irritation, impatience, anger, or critical feelings. If I look beneath the initial feeling, I usually find feelings of sadness and grief. Just by being herself, my wife is almost guaranteed to touch some sore spot of mine. She's not causing that sore spot. By her proximity, she pushes against my tender spots, my vulnerabilities. Of course, every day, I also have feelings of comfort, appreciation, and affection. But those aren't the feelings that most of us find hard to work with. As I've said before, my style tends to be one of wanting to feel more in control, competent, self-sufficient, and independent. Anytime somebody who's important to me is not behaving in my preferred style, it's very activating. Just through a process of resonance, we feel what those close to us are feeling. When these are feelings that we're trying to disown, it's disturbing. I find that it's difficult to have feelings I've spent most of my life trying not to feel, like dependency or a loss of control, and so on. I find it difficult to have these feelings that I've spent most of my life trying not to feel get triggered every day. Recently, I had the opportunity to work with just this type of feeling. My wife and I have twin daughters who are currently in college. One weekend when they were home from school, one of our daughters was so upset with her mother that she was refusing to speak to her. This is naturally a very disturbing experience for a mother to have her daughter refusing to communicate. I kept telling my wife to let it go and that this type of behavior is typical for a 19-year-old girl and was not a reflection of her capacity as a mother. But she was feeling incredibly hurt and upset. And the degree to which my wife was affected by our daughter's silence was very disturbing to me because it revealed her dependency. The longer the silent treatment went on, the more activated my wife got, and the more irritated I became. I wanted her to take a more objective view and behave more independently, as I would have done in the same situation. The fact that my feelings of irritation were being triggered directs my awareness toward exactly what it is that I have to work on. If I want to free myself of my own conditioned history and be able to show up confidently in the present moment, choosing my life as an adult rather than reenacting my childhood, I must learn how to be with feelings of dependency. For many years, I tried to resolve or eliminate my relational disturbance. At some point, however, I decided to change tactics. Basically, I was exhausted from my project of creating the life I thought I deserved. a life without disturbance. It just wasn't working. I decided to commit to what I was already feeling but didn't like, to investigate and see for myself whether the disturbance triggered in me by my relationship was actually the problem I was claiming it to be. This approach is, of course, very resonant with my Buddhist training. In the Tibetan Vajrayana, I think I said it right, lineage, everything is welcomed as valid. We don't dismiss any experience. I found this inclusive approach to be very useful, both in my own marriage and when I'm working with clients. Okay, the next section is titled, The Disturbing Nature of Intimacy. Our society's idea seems to be that relationship is supposed to be a refuge from our difficult lives. Our cultural expectation reflected through the media and in terms of relational norms is that intimacy is supposed to be warm, supportive, and continually sexually passionate. Perhaps we'll hit a few bumps at the beginning, but then we're supposed to sort of coast from there. I just don't find much evidence that this is accurate. I do think that some couples are lucky. Just like an individual might win the lottery, some couples win the relationship lottery. They genuinely have very positive, passionate, easy relationships, which continue in this way over decades. But the majority of people I've worked with and known socially struggle with intense disturbance and vulnerability, which get brought out into the open by intimate relationships. We might consider the difference, though, between what we want and what is to our benefit. Most of us would probably choose a life without pain, never getting sick, being independently wealthy, children who never drove us crazy, and so on. But health is not synonymous with positive experience. Wisdom is not the same as happiness, and freedom is definitely not dependent on feeling good. From a Buddhist perspective, a fortunate life is one with the right amount of suffering. As long as we are willing and able to work with and learn from our difficult experiencing, the path of waking up appears to require contrast, discovering that it's impossible to be identified with any one version of reality, any one formula. At the same time, it seems very helpful to learn how to moderate the degree of intensity that we engage with. Not enough disturbance is comfortable, but unlikely to bring into awareness what we must work with. Too much disturbance is likely to take us into a dissociative or even re-traumatized state, in which it's very hard to stay present. In exactly the same way, a fortunate, intimate relationship can be understood as one with the right amount of suffering. But our relationship with our partner, to actually be fortunate, we must discipline our relationship to own our difficult experiencing. This means that we must do the counter-instinctual work of bringing awareness, embodiment, and kindness to exactly what we don't want to feel. We have a choice about how we relate to the disturbance of intimacy. If we want an intimate relationship to only be a source of happiness and comfort and security, I think most of us will end up feeling disappointed, maybe even bitter or victimized. Instead, we might consider relating to our experience of intimacy as one of the most powerful vehicles for personal and spiritual growth that we, in our culture, have access to. As our culture doesn't really seem to have many options in terms of viable spiritual paths. There are many understandings of what a spiritual path involves. One view says that our normal, socially familiar experience is not the whole picture. Most of us feel ourselves to be very small, finite selves in an incredibly vast and infinite universe. And then we die. How can we find meaning, joy, and open-heartedness in these circumstances? Most spiritual paths offer a variety of ways to help us see through this appearance of alienation, to experience our actual identity with the mysterious, vast nature of reality, to experience ourselves as expressions of the universe rather than as its observers. Because this is not easy work and it usually progresses through certain stages, it's usually presented as a path. Understanding and working with intimacy as a path is one of the best ways to challenge ourselves to grow or to wake up. From a Buddhist point of view, another way of saying this is that intimacy demands authenticity. The closer we are to somebody, the longer we are with somebody, the more difficult it is to pretend that very deep grief, rage, and fear or panic are not being triggered in our relationship. And the harder it becomes to deny how powerfully our partners bring love and meaning to our lives beyond what we can create for ourselves. In our relationships, we can choose either to acknowledge and go into our disturbances and vulnerabilities or to deny and avoid them. If we choose the latter, it's generally an unconscious choice on the part of both people. We unconsciously agree to ritualize the relationship in ways that allow us to stay together, while protecting us from too much vulnerability. But if we want to grow, if we want to wake up, it makes sense to me to use the never resolvable disturbance of intimacy as an opportunity to gradually increase our tolerance for living in the truth of each moment, rather than constantly trying to live in the fantasy of our preferences, to use it as a tool to help free ourselves of our conditioned history so we can live our lives as adults rather than reenacting the survival strategies that we developed when we were quite young and immature. So good. Okay, so it just keeps getting better. Oh my God, and there's more. There's more. That's like chapter 6, so you've gone through quite a bit of the book.